This is the worst spot to have just before lunch, so I won't be long. And I'll like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and acknowledge the Aranda people from where I come from. I'm from Alice Springs. And so I'll be talking not just regional, but remote and very, very remote. And this particular research was funded by the NT government under their NT-RRP scheme. And it was done by 3 researchers. I'm just presenting on the behalf of all of them. Okay. So these are the kind of images we see when there is a natural hazard-related disaster. And after this, we see even worse images of household goods strewn on the pavement. If it's a cyclone, then you see roof sheets and so on. And it's pretty traumatic, of course, for the people who are there. And most of the efforts of emergency management service people is people and property. And so waste really comes down way below in their priority list. But the reason why it's so important is that till we don't remove that waste after disasters, we can't really access those properties. We can't, there are diseases that are related to waterborne diseases that are related to waterlogged areas, and also people who need to make insurance claims for their homes can't do it because they can't access, and rescue crews can't get in. So it's actually a pretty significant problem of removing this waste, but it's not really on top of priority of emergency management services. And now it's even worse because we are seeing these disasters on a continually regular basis, and with each the cost is going up of recovery and reconstruction. So I'm talking to all municipal governments, so I'm sure that they know that the waste volumes that we see from disasters is actually almost 5 to 15% of the annual waste that the councils plan for. And a significant part of the recovery cost are for clearing up operations and reconstruction. So this includes managing debris right from the time when you remove it, and it leads into ongoing recovery process, which might take years. And safely disposing of this waste is part of it. So we do need to rethink how we are managing this waste. So when we talk about planning for managing waste, it does need to be done before a disaster hits, because then we get into a very reactive mode, and this needs pre-planning. And there is evidence from studies in the US which show that the counties, oh, this has gone blank, is there a reason? Sorry. That's okay. I'll keep talking. So the counties that actually did pre-planning for their waste, first they did it much faster than the other counties that didn't have a pre-plan. They actually recycled twice as much, and they also got 3 times as much federal funding for all their recycling efforts and for the recovery process. Sorry, I still don't have this. I kind of know, but some prompts would be good. Maybe I just go on. So if I miss something, it's not important. It's only what I remember. Okay. Now, the problem often we find is of situating the governance of this system. And because waste management in business as usual or non-disaster time is under the jurisdiction of local governments. And during a disaster, it is the state level and the federal level organizations that take over. And this creates a bit of a tension between the roles and responsibilities of all that who are responding and all those who are involved. And so it means who are the people who are going to do it, do they have access to infrastructure and so on, the right infrastructure. And so our research was conducted over a year and a half, and we looked at Northern Australia, and I'll just explain that after this one. And what we tried to examine and what are the processes and proceedings in place for waste in normal times, non-disaster, and what happened during the disaster times. And when we were conducting this research, we saw that there is a need, or there's already a shift when we look at waste governance. So it's no longer waste management, but it's waste governance. And what is meant by that? When we talk about management, it's more a managerial approach. But when we talk about governance, this includes all the actors that are actually included in that process. And last 2 days we have heard a lot about inclusiveness and taking along all the actors that are there in waste management space. So this so using governance just establishes that we look at the other actors, we look at the other networks that are present. So this has shifted the emphasis just from the state and federal government to include the other actors, and this is just an illustration, a small one, that we do have the residents, the volunteers who are involved in disasters, the aid agencies, recyclers. So it's not just the government that can actually they can take responsibility, but they're not the only ones who are in that space. And it's important to recognize these actors, their roles, and also how can we coordinate the whole disaster response better. So this is the area that I look at, and I don't know if this works, but Alice Spring is right almost at the base. So I live there, and what we were trying to see is how does it work in remote and very remote regions. And so we looked across the Northern Territory, and it's extremely different from, of course, from New South Wales, but this is from the southern states and territories, and it has the lowest population density. So I think Gwada mentioned 3.5 people per square kilometers. We have 0.2 people per square kilometers. So it's almost like an arm per square kilometer or something of that. And most of the residents live on the top end near Darwin, so 60% there, 11% near Alice Springs, and the rest are in remote indigenous communities and homelands. And so they're really, really small settlements that we are talking about here. And also to emphasize that our landscape is very different, because you can see how large it is and how dispersed the population are. So the transport networks are a challenge to move waste around. We have access to communities. Some communities, 6 months of the year can't be accessed by road. They can only be accessed through barge or through small aircraft. So there's very high staff turnover, so retaining staff is an issue. And so it's just compounded to the geography and demography of this place. And we also have a very different population makeup. So while indigenous populations make up about 3.2% across Australia, it's 26% of the population in Northern Territory. So in our research, we collected information from all the people we thought who are involved in disaster waste management and regular waste management, and these included the NT government, because they are the emergency services, local government who provide waste services at other times, the remote communities, some of them we involved across the top end, the residents, the organizations that run in those communities, and the local ranger groups. And so there were 3 findings that we had, and the first one was that we do need a distinct waste management plan for each community, and it's not just for the whole territory, but for each location, and we'll come to that. Similarly, we cannot adopt solutions that are universal cookie-cutter solutions that are developed in more urban populations. We have different access to different infrastructure and very different makeup of the remote communities. For example, that if we want to recycle waste from after a cyclone in a remote island, we'll first have to consolidate it, put it on a barge, and then that barge will come to Darwin. And in Darwin, if it can be recycled, good, but otherwise it will be put on a freight train or a truck and moved all the way to Adelaide or to New South Wales or Victoria, wherever that material can go for further processing. And so we do have to develop solutions that are more local, more specific, and more respond to the conditions of that place. This will give you a bit more idea of the kind of topography that we have. We have the coast, we have the big rivers in the middle, and then we have the desert in the center. And these are the kind of roads. You don't see people for miles and miles and miles. And these are like not all season roads. So we do need to know that if we have to respond to a disaster, what is the access we might have to that area, which time of the year are the rivers flooded, how far are these communities from, let's say, Darwin or Alice, where they might have to be evacuated to. And the third thing is that we do have to look at a solution that respond to cultural sensitivities. So you can't just move people from one community and put them next to another one. They might not, it might not be culturally appropriate, or if you move them to Darwin, then how are you going to clean their houses? There are restrictions on cleaning up the houses or touching objects that are in these houses. So you have to do it in a very careful way. So how do we, so when these disaster waste management plans are designed, we have to incorporate all these differences. And where do we put this waste? Because that land is indigenous owned, and I'll come to that in a bit later. Now, the second point is, as is the conference theme, that we do have to find that in each waste management plan, we do include the local stakeholders, which is not happening at the moment. And each disaster is local, it's impacting the local people, it's in a particular area, a particular type of, whether it's cyclones will be more prevalent in the top end, we have bushfires in the interiors, so the people who are in that region are the best placed to understand the diversity of the hazards and how they can be best responded to. And of course, I mean, New South Wales government, I think, as far as I know, they are one of the only jurisdictions which have the local government included in their disaster waste management plan, and South Australia to some extent. But while we were doing this research, we did not come across any other region which had it embedded in their program. And so the people that we are looking at are the local government. They are the ones who actually, before a disaster, know which staff is on leave or who will be there, which machines need repair, and will they be ready for this disaster. So they definitely need to be part of this response. We have community organizations such as Indigenous Rangers. They know the land and they have license to operate machinery. So they also need to be part of that conversation of how do we respond to disasters. And of course, the appropriate community leaders, because as I said, I've been repeating myself too often that these communities are really remote. So for any state or territory government organizations to come there with help is going to take some time. So these are the people on the ground, and so even the local community has to be, you have to build capacity as how they can be the local leaders and they can channelize people and activities in preparing and responding to disaster events. I'm not going to read this table, so don't worry. What I'm just saying that each disaster creates different types of waste streams, and how do we plan for that? I mean, this is already a lot of study has been done on that what are the hazardous, non-hazardous wastes that arise from each event, and what we kind of think that this comes from homes, and if there are shops and organizations. What we do not look in this situation is the waste that comes from evacuation center. And every person that we talked to talked about the huge waste that comes out of evacuation centers, because people are living their lives in those difficult circumstances. So there is food wastage, there are hundreds and hundreds of bottles of water. There are nappies and 2-minute noodles, cups, and it's just humongous waste. And we know that this is going to happen because people do have to live somewhere. So if we start planning for this and use it in our procurement, how are we going to procure the material, food and other things for the people in evacuation center, and where is it going to go? So it's not really rocket science, where do bottled water goes? But because we are in such a state of panic and urgency mode that we do not have the time when a disaster is unfolding to start looking for this. So that is the reason why we say all of these things can be planned for, especially in evacuation centers. So why don't we do it and start before a disaster? Another point is that where will this waste go? So you can, of course, put it all together and maybe light it up, or I don't know. But if we have to look at circular economy solutions, look at better solution, then we do need a temporary storage site. And this is fairly regular practice where they are recycling from after hazards, a natural hazard. And so you move it to a temporary storage site, and then you can sort it and see what can be recycled, what can't, how far it has to go. But in the Northern Territory, 50% of the land is indigenous owned, so you can't get permission for having a temporary landfill that easily, because all the land is under the Northern Territory Aboriginal Lands Right Act. So you have to start these negotiations way before, because it might take years, and there are very few landfills in the Northern Territory that are actually licensed. So preparing for this temporary waste too is a process that I think we have to start quite a bit of time ahead. And this is the last and third point, that if we have a disaster waste management plan, it needs to be accessible to people, and it has to be linked to other plans. And the first plan that we talk about is the local emergency plan, because there are 46 local emergency plans for these communities in the Northern Territory. And what they document is what is the land, who are the people who are available, so the infrastructure available, and what are the processes that are going to happen or people are going to follow during an emergency. So this is kind of the right place for this to sit in. And what this would allow is not only a response to the disaster, but where is the waste? Because local government is part of the team that works on the local emergency plan, but there's no mention of waste. It just seems as if it will just disappear at the end of the disaster. Also, we saw that several disasters have been evaluated or reviewed, and the lessons are documented. We have not had any public inquiry in the Northern Territory that is accessible to the people. So there might be some at the government level, but it's behind closed doors. So unfortunately, what happens if this happens, if it is not accessible, is that you don't learn. You don't understand what resources are required and how should accountable decision making be done. So such inquiries are required, and they need to be documented and be so that people can see. And another reason why they are required is because there's such a high staff turnover. So you have some people in 1 year, most of them are gone by the next year. So if anybody is working with I have a feeling maybe it's other remote councils also, but if you're working with the Northern Territory government or local government, by the time you've set up your relationships, you talk to them next year, everybody's moved. So if we do not capture that corporate knowledge or the residents' knowledge and put it in a waste management plan, then it all gets lost, and which is a huge loss. So if there are reports made, nobody knows from 1 year. So people will, when we were talking to them, oh yes, there was a cyclone, but nobody knows how things unfolded, how much waste came out of it, where did the waste get moved. The only story, some of the stories that were there was in that cyclone, there was asbestos everywhere. But there was no documented, that's just anecdotal, and there's no documentation. So just to conclude, that when I started with saying that we need to rethink ways of managing waste, And I emphasize again that we do need to pre-plan. It can't be a reactive approach. It needs to be more proactive. And the three things that we need to do is having a disaster waste management plan, but which has to be specific to each remote community. It has to include the local stakeholders and, most importantly, the local government. And it needs to be linked to other relevant documents and be accessible to all the stakeholders. And as the next stage of, and that's it, next stage of this project, we have just got funding from the federal government looking at designing and doing a pilot for how disaster waste management plans can work in remote communities, and we are doing it across the NT in 3 different locations. And yeah, so if anybody has any information they want to share or they want to see how we are going, more than welcome, because this is a publicly funded project, so we are always happy to share the information that we have collected. And this is also in a report, so feel free to email me and I can send you the report if anybody's interested. Thank you.